I'm so excited you're here.
So am I.
So, of course, as I was thinking about all the people that I wanted to join me on the Simply Living Me podcast, you were like at the top of the list. Not just because, even though I know you run a very large organization, but you've been so inspirational to me in a lot of different ways that you either know or don't know with regards to my entrepreneurship journey, that I felt like it was important for us to have this conversation and for you to join me in sharing with our viewers and our listeners just all the things that Jackie is and all the wonderful words of wisdom, motivation, inspiration that you impart on me and others every single day. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for the invitation, Shar.
Yeah.
I'm really excited by the conversation. I really am.
Yeah. Now, anytime I get a chance to talk with you, we have some really interesting, deep conversations. And so we're going to let people in on a little insight into what you and I do often when we get together. So let's just start off by sharing with everybody, who is Dr. Jacklyn Chisholm?
Let's start with she's a woman who loves the Lord. I have to start there because the rest of the conversation won't make sense if I don't start there. Right. I am the wife of a phenomenal man, the mother of two strong women, and the grandmother of my granddaughter. Her name is Shanoon, and my grandson's name is Yaya.
I don't know that I knew that.
Yeah, I have a grandson and granddaughter. And we're raising our granddaughter.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, okay. So challenges in life. I learned a new word this morning, and I never thought of myself like this. It's called a creative. I've always called myself a change agent. I enjoy, making things. I enjoy putting things together. I enjoy bringing, calm from chaos. I enjoy those kinds of things. But this morning I actually listened to Charmaine Brown and she called it a creative. I love making things.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what you do. I mean, I can hearken back to, I can't remember if I met you when you were with Case Western Reserve or the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I know it was definitely Rock Hall. And in your role, even though, I know you weren't the curator of all of the amazing assets for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, there was definitely a creative component to the work that you did there. And then I know a little bit enough to be dangerous about your history, your career path, but I'm going to, yeah. But I think one of the interesting things that we'll see along that journey is that you have always been a creative. So
yeah, I really have. Yeah. And I don't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good.
It took a while for me to figure this out. When I was little, I used to love puzzles, and I could do puzzles for hours. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized that's part of what I do. I walk into a situation. Often God puts me in situations where I'm the first to do it. Almost every job I've had, I was the first to do. Yep. Or to bring it to the next level. And bringing it to the next level, I had to understand how many pieces are there on this puzzle. Which ones are appropriate for now? Which ones can I discard? Which ones do I need to bring in? And it took me a while to literally figure that out. That I enjoy that. There's some people, a couple of years ago, I was talking to somebody and we were talking about how firefighters, their job is to run to a fire while everybody else is running away. I run to the fire when everybody else is running away because I'm going, that's what we could do. Yeah,
right. Let's solve this puzzle.
And I get energy from that. Other people go, they would sit there and go, oh my God, there's this work to do. And I go, oh my God, there's this work to do.
There's this opportunity.
There's opportunity.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to share a story that, and I'll try to clean it up. But again,
you don't need to clean it up for our viewers, but for your protection.
Okay. I'm good either way, because at some point we're authentic leadership.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a story about a little boy. Somebody told me this years ago. There was a little boy. His parents were with him. And there was a pile of shit in the corner. Mm-hmm. And the little boy was so excited. And his parents kept looking at him going, what's going on? Because all they saw was a pile of shit. And he said, with that much shit, there must be a pony in there somewhere. That way, I look at this stuff.
That's you.
There must be a pony in there somewhere, And it's important because a lot of things, especially that entrepreneurs have to deal with, is it's covered in manure. It's covered, and you have to figure out, number one, you got to remember that the journey has to be worth it to you. Mm-hmm. If you're not willing to go into that to get to the pony, then at some point you're going to quit because it's not going to be worth it.
Right.
So
don't you think don't you think that there are aspects of working for organizations that are similar?
Oh, absolutely.
So it's not necessarily that the experience of being an entrepreneur is so very different than it is working in an organization. There's a lot of similarities there. And I think what happens is people who are working in the traditional, working for organizations or for other people think that there is some unknown universe or world on the other side in entrepreneurship, but not realizing that they're using the same skills or similar skills or have similar experiences that are so transferable into entrepreneurship that it's not even funny.
I would agree, and I would add, in the work world, right, in business that already exists, structure's already there. Mm-hmm. All you're doing is coming in at a particular level. Position already is there. The job description is there.
Yeah,
you're not creating
those things. Right.
Those things are already. What you're creating, though, and I'll talk about it from the perspective, in my opinion, of C-suite. Mm-hmm. The minute I became a C-suiter, right, CEO, even though the job exists, it's a lot of visioning. It's a lot of determining where it is that you want this organization to go and how you're planning to get there and how you need to bring some other people along with you. Because as they say, if you don't have followers, all you're doing is taking a walk.
Tell us a little bit about your CEO-ing. Like what do you do? What organization are you the CEO of? And what's a typical day for you?
All right. So I am the president and CEO of Step Forward. It is the largest community action agency in Ohio. Our revenue is about $42 million. We have about 320 employees. A regular day for me is I'm responsible for all of it. And I realize that I'm responsible for all of it. I call it the Atlas syndrome. And Atlas was, had the world on his shoulder. I also recently wrote a book. I'm in the process of publishing it. But it's called Leadership Lessons, Notes from It for the Journey. And in there, I really talk about the fact that a CEO is the conductor of an orchestra. They're not playing the instruments.
No.
They're the conductor. They're supposed to know how to read the music. If nobody else knows how to read the music, the CEO is supposed to know how to read the music. And they're supposed to know when each part is played and how. And I think too often when people get to the C-suite, if you don't make that mental adjustment that you're not the one playing the instrument, then you'll get in the weeds. A CEO is not really supposed to get in the weeds. The only time I'm supposed to get in the weeds is if the people who report to me, if they're not doing the part that I'm expecting them to play, then I may get in the weeds. But if I have to keep getting in the weeds, then I probably don't need you in that role.
Right.
So the CEO, just again, going back to entrepreneurship, the entrepreneur has the idea, the CEO has the vision.
Mm-hmm.
The entrepreneur has to bring people along. CEO has to do the same thing. The entrepreneur has to create the infrastructure. Ideally, as CEO, when we walk in, the infrastructure is already in place. We have to figure out whether or not the infrastructure that we have in place is going to get us to the vision that we have for the organization.
Correct.
And if it doesn't, then we have to change that. We have to tweak that in some way. So when I got to step forward, and it's formally called the Council for Economic Opportunity in Greater Cleveland, and that was a decision point of, does this name, does it signify what we do? And the reality, it never did.
Right.
In my opinion, it never did. But as a result of that, it was, let's look at all of the things that underpin the organization, and will those things help me get the organization to where I think it should go? And the reality, it was no.
Yeah.
For me, it was very manual. And for a $40 million company to be manual, and I arrived 8 years ago, it was crazy. So we literally there isn't a part of this organization that has not been touched. Not one part. Every single aspect of the organization has been touched.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was sitting here thinking about the vision that you have had for the organization, and building having the right talent, having the right structure, having the right strategy, having the right tools. As I think about, because part of Simply Living Me is really encouraging people to really explore the parts of them that they have untapped, and using entrepreneurship as a vehicle to do that. So when I hear you talk about all the things that you've had to do as the CEO, how much of that applies to an individual looking or assessing their life, the way it is today versus the way or what it should be, or the way they want it to be? What are some of the skills that you use with the organization that you think could also transfer and translate into someone really assessing their life from a career, maybe from a career perspective?
To be honest with you, I try not to separate career from life.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because I want the two to be integrated.
Yeah.
I've tried to have jobs where they were just jobs, and it doesn't work for me. Bored to tears. It has to matter to me. I have to be passionate about it, otherwise I can't do it. So I try my best not to separate those two. I recognize that there's certain aspects of the job that require maybe a different kind of skill set. But in terms of being, Jackie, it's taken me, and again, I've said this to other people, I deserve an Oscar for the number of years I pretended to be Jackie Chisholm. Performing Jackie Chisholm is Jackie Chisholm. And I decided a few years ago, and it was because of something really difficult that happened. But I decided a few years ago that the only person I can be is me. And I've heard that from, other people and listening to me. But the reality is I cannot be a copy of me.
Yeah.
Nobody else is going to do Jackie Chisholm like Jackie Chisholm's going to do Jackie Chisholm.
Did you know that you were playing Jackie Chisholm at that time, though? You knew?
I knew.
Okay.
I knew. And the reason I knew was because I grew up in a household of abuse. So I wasn't personally abused by my father. My mother was. And because of their relationship, you get to the point where you start thinking that if I'm good enough, they'll stay. If I'm good enough, they won't hurt someone that I love. And then when I was 15, I was in a relationship from the age of 14 until 19. I was in a relationship with a person who beat me. And so for that period of time in my head, this was normal because I had seen this at home. And then I married my first husband. This is my second husband. Somebody told me years ago and gave me the language for it's called practice husband. I had a practice husband. So my practice husband, in that relationship, I became suicidal. And it was in becoming suicidal and going through the tough work of counseling and unpacking all that stuff that there are certain aspects of who I am that were uncovered.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware because I was too busy being somebody else so that people would like me and people would care about me. And a lot of that, I'm not saying it's all true for people who grew up in abusive contexts, but I will say that had a lot to do with it. So if you needed me to be green, I was green. You needed me to be purple, I was purple, just so that you would like me. And then God sent me to my husband and I to Atlanta. And that was one of the best and worst experiences of my life. It was where I understood that we are more than our titles.
Yeah.
See, it had always been my title, happy and thankful for it,
Yeah.
But when I didn't have a title, it was, so who are you if you don't have a title?
Okay.
And
who are you? Who's your identity now? Because it's not associated with an organization anymore.
Yeah. And you had to go through that when you decided to be an entrepreneur.
Ma'am. Yes, I did.
Yeah. It's one of the first things people ask you is, what do you do? And when I left the Rock Hall, the reason I left the Rock Hall was because I got a call from a developer in Atlanta for a music museum. And he told me at the time that I was the highest ranking Black female in a music museum. I didn't know that at the time. You just do your work.
Right.
And I knew it was time for me to leave, but I didn't know where God was going to take me. So when the Lord said, go to Atlanta, people thought I was crazy. My husband thought I was crazy. He came with me anyway, but he thought I was crazy. And the funding fell through. And so we're in Atlanta. We don't have the funding. I walked away from a job. Now, not unhappily walked away from a job. It was time for me to leave. But I didn't know what the next step was going to be. And then I certainly didn't think it was going to be a music museum in Atlanta.
Right.
And so when that fell through and I came back, it was what I call the dark night of the soul. And it's in those periods of time where you're talking to God, you're not hearing. You don't know where you are. You don't know what the next step is. You know you can't die here. Right? You just don't know what's going to happen. And it was very difficult. It was probably, in terms of spiritual journeys, the worst experience I've ever had. And periodically I would hear, don't worry, it's okay, you're on the right road. But I couldn't see any of that.
Yeah.
I couldn't see it. But when it was all said and done, when the light starts to shine a little bit, I wasn't the same person. When you go into those kind of cave experiences and you come out the other end, you're not the same. And they're designed for you not to be the same.
Exactly.
And so instead of me being you need me to be purple or you need me to be green, I came out and go, I'm sorry, who are you?
Right.
You didn't pay my bills while I was in there. You didn't call and ask about me to see how I was okay or not. You didn't say boo. And I'm over here investing, some emotional energy in what you think of me.
A whole lot. Yeah. Over
Please.
it. Yes.
So it was the best, and it really was the tale of two cities, the best of times and worst of times.
Yeah. And, you and I had some conversations about my journey, my deep, what did you call it? The deep, dark, well, I call it the dark hole. Yeah. The dark night of the soul. That was 2022 for me. And on the other side, coming out into the light. You do. You walk into a whole new person, a whole new set of purpose and passion. And you kind of have that, fuck it, I don't give a damn. Right?
That's it.
And, and so much is born out of that. Opportunity is born out of that. It's just our jobs to actually take a hold of that, right? And move with it. And so I wholeheartedly understand exactly what you're talking about.
So let's talk about real quick the momentum that it requires. When I was in school, I hated math. I mean, genuinely. But there is something to be said for physics.
Mm-hmm.
When a particular item thing is not moving, it takes a lot of energy to make it move. Now, once it's moving, it has momentum.
Right. You can't get momentum without movement.
Can't. That's it. But what happens is, especially at the beginning, is to get the momentum. Mm-hmm. That to me is the harder. That's usually where entrepreneurs stop, because it is hard. It is difficult. Think about pushing a boulder up a mountain. Eventually, mountains don't last forever. At some point, like a roller coaster, you're going to get to a point where all of a sudden momentum takes over and it goes downhill. Okay. But in the meantime, you have to push it. Right. And even with a CEO, when I got to what used to be CEO GC, now Step Forward, when I arrived, the person who position I took over, she had already gone to prison 4 months before I got there. So not only did I step into an organization that was challenged, I stepped into an organization that everybody was looking to determine whether or not it was going to continue to exist. Right. And I knew that. That's why I didn't want the job.
So I was like, there's that pile of shit again.
Didn't want the job. Didn't. I told God, I know you love me more than this. But it was the Atlanta experience that prepared me for that. I didn't know that at the time.
We usually never do. We usually never do. Yeah.
At the time, I just knew that God had put me in this position, and I knew it was God because I was running from it. I really did. Mm-hmm. And things kept lining up. I had 6 interviews for a job I didn't want. We could talk about that at some other point. But when I got there, and when I realized within like 3 or 4 months, the major grant that drives this organization was in jeopardy of being lost. I'd just been there 3 or 4 months. And I'm sitting there going, God, I told you I didn't want the job in the first place.
Okay. And now this.
Exactly. And the certain members of the board had determined that they were going to take over the organization. They had been running it anyway. Right. And even though we had this conversation in the interview that they were going to allow me to do the work, the minute I got there, so I've got financial problems with the organization. I had, morale problems with the organization because their leader just went to prison. And then I've got this power struggle with the board. It was in terms of, like the perfect storm. It was terrible. And I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it, to be honest with you. Yeah. Charmaine, you and I have talked about it. Yeah. And all I did was I leaned on my faith. I kept saying, God, you sent me here to do a work. Mm-hmm. If I've done what you wanted me to do, I'm good. I can leave. Right. If not, then I need your help. And I remember this was on the same moments after the chairman of the board at the time wheeled in my office and told me that they had voted to terminate me, and I'd only been there 6 months. And I'm sitting at my table going, okay, God, what are we doing? And all of a sudden my back got straight and I was like, oh, hell no. And in that moment, I understood that the reason I was there was to fight. Yeah. Now, did I know that at the beginning? No, I did not. I knew this is what I knew when I got there. I knew I liked creating things. Mm-hmm. I knew bringing order, bringing order out of chaos. I knew that. I knew that I liked creating systems. I'm a systems person. It doesn't make sense to me if we're going around the same tree twice. If we haven't put a system around that, then don't make me go around that tree again. Right. Okay. So I knew those things. I knew my North Star was integrity. Mm-hmm. I told him during my interview. 2 things I told him. Number 1, I'm a change agent. If you don't want it to change, don't hire me. And that's a quote. The second thing I said was my paycheck will not pay for my integrity. I work too hard for that and nobody gets that. And they still hired me. I mean, mm-hmm. I was shocked when they offered me a position. So there's certain true things of me that I knew. I want to go back to the question that you asked a little earlier. you really need to spend the time to figure out what is true for you, because that's your foundation. If you don't know that, you know, that expression about if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So you need to be real clear about what I will accept and what I will not accept, because life challenges you, and these experiences challenge you, and your dream could be so big that you have to be careful that you don't shortcut it because you're so busy trying to get to the dream. I would love to be able to say right now that I will never, ever do anything that will embarrass my family or myself. Well, the reality is that's not a true statement. At some point in time,
probably not.
I would like to. That's never my plan. Right. So I don't make it a habit like lying. I don't make it a habit of lying. Right. That it's not a habit that I try to foster.
Right.
Have I lied before? Yes. Will I lie again? Probably. Do I make it a habit of it? No. And if I lie, under normal circumstances, I try not to do that. I usually try to own what I own. Right. If I make a mistake, I own it. Okay? My bad, my fault. I'm sorry. Those kinds of things. But I had to be real clear about who is Jackie Chisholm in this environment. I needed to know that walking in the door, because the minute all that stuff hit, and it hit quick,
very quick,
I don't have the luxury of trying to figure this out.
You just gotta go.
So
you gotta go,
yeah. And I wouldn't even say just do. I would say you have to be. You have to be. In that moment, it was because of that dark night of the soul. I felt like, and again, I've said this to other people, it felt like God took me, like when you're washing your jeans, what they say that you should do when you're washing jeans is to turn the jeans inside out. That's the way it felt like God had done me. I felt like he had turned me inside out in Atlanta, brought me back to Cleveland. And I was so much clearer about who I was and what I would tolerate and what I wouldn't tolerate. Yeah. So that by the time I made it to, the organization, I had a pretty good idea of who Jackie Chisholm was. I had a pretty good, now, not to say that I wasn't on my haunches, because I had never been in an environment like this before.
Yeah.
I had never run a, multi-million-dollar company, and had, at that point, it was 420 employees. I never had 420 people depend on my decision making before.
Maybe shoes, but not people.
Shoes, clothes. I've got 3 different clothes. Not proud. I'm not proud. It just is. But I'd never been in an environment like that before. And all I kept saying was, God, are you sure you want me to do this? I haven't. I mean, most of that I ever had was like 12 people reporting me.
Right.
And what I realized is an organization as big as ours, I really only have 5 people report to me. Then their people report to them, and their people report to them, and their people report to them. But I really only have 5 people who report to me.
So as I'm sitting here listening to you talk, I'm saying to myself, she is describing the essence of simply living me. Just by you detailing this experiences and getting to know who you are and being who you are. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. So I would love for you to share with the audience and our viewers, what does simply living me mean to you?
So for me, I want to go back to a story that really helped me understand, crystallized in my head who I am. I used to report to a guy at Case, and he asked me a question one day. He said, Jackie, is your directness intended to inform or to intimidate? And no one ever asked me that question before. And I thought about it for a minute. I said, depends on the person. And what I liked about him was he and I had established early on the ability to be honest with each other. Now that's a hallmark of who I am.
Yeah.
I love that about me. I really try my best to be as honest as I can.
Yeah.
So he said, it might be helpful for you to tell people that's who you are. I said, okay. And so, I leave his office and I'm going, gee, I wonder what that means. And eventually what it came to mean was my personal mission statement of open, honest, direct communication. So whenever I start a relationship with anybody in a business meeting or wherever it may be, I start with, I have a personal mission statement of open, honest, direct communication. Are you comfortable with that?
Mm.
And it gives people, number one, it gives people an understanding of this is how I choose to show up in the world.
Right.
Number two, it says to them, this is how I'm going to communicate with you. I expect the same from you. Mm-hmm. So it kind of levels the field at the beginning so that we at least understand the same language. All right. Number three, it says, and I'm going to have to, another story. When my boss said that to me, I went to my anthropology professor. I'm an anthropologist by training, a psychological anthropologist. And he said, well, do you know where that comes from? And I said, no. And he said, Caucasians are trained. He said, they're socialized to communicate. And I'm going to use on a scale of 1 to 10, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. He said, they're trained to fill in 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10. Okay. He said, African Americans, he said, you're trained to communicate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He said, so if you're talking to a person who has gaps and you're supposed to fill the gaps, but you don't have gaps, he said, that's how there's miscommunication. And I was like, oh, I never heard that before. Never heard that before.
Wow.
But they're socialized. So they say things and then we're sitting there going, this is what I heard you say. And they're going, but didn't you hear the underneath all of that? And you go, you didn't say it.
You did.
Whereas Black people, we're clearer in our communication. So once I had language like that, once I understood that concept, it made it so much easier for me to simply live Jackie Chisholm. Because if I tell you who I am through my personal mission statement, I give you an opportunity to say no, open, honest, direct communication. Are you comfortable with that? If you say yes, then don't bullshit me. I'm not going to bullshit you. And then we can, now we can have a real conversation. And I don't even say that to people. We've got an hour. We can either spend the hour, the first 15, 20 minutes, doing whatever that is, or we can do like the first 5 minutes of, hey, how you doing? How's it going? Blah, blah, blah. And then spend, next 55 minutes real. So you decide. Right. So when I say things like that, after giving you my personal mission statement, it's not a surprise to you because I told you.
It shouldn't be a surprise. Right.
Yeah. Or even I'll periodically remind people. I'll say, you will recall that I said, and then I'll go, and the reason that's important is because I need to say this. Right. So I'll even prep them for it. But what I have found to be true for me, because I am that honest or direct, and I'm not doing it to be mean or anything like that. I've learned to round my corners, so I'm not taking people's faces off. But I mean exactly what I say. Yeah. And because I mean what I say, then you can take what I tell you to the bank.
Right.
All you have is your name and your word. So as far as I can tell, my name is good because my word is good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There is a lot to be said about staying true to your word. And even when you have missteps, because we all do,
right?
Being honest and owning it is the other part of it, right?
Oh, absolutely. I had an experience recently that broke my heart. So we opened up a new center, a new site, and there were so many people there. And the people that I should have thanked, I didn't. And I knew when the event was over, God, that was a missed opportunity. So I tried to make up for it by loving on them more. That afternoon or that evening, I got an email from the woman's supervisor because she was hurt that she wasn't acknowledged. And my response to the supervisor was, she's absolutely right. So I wrote her a personal email and I acknowledged, I'm sorry. That was not my intention. The next morning, I went to the site and apologized to everybody at the site because I needed them to know I fell short.
Yeah.
I apologize. And in my falling short, unfortunately, you felt that no one cared. And that was my mistake.
Yeah.
It wasn't my intention, but it was my mistake.
Those are powerful leadership traits that a lot of leaders could learn a few lessons. Because that doesn't happen often. It's sad to say, you know?
No. But you know what I think, Charmaine, at the end of the day, to me, a good leader, and this goes back to the Bible, you treat people the way you want to be treated. I would not want that brushed under. I remember what it's like. And I will say this. Much of my leadership comes from good experiences and bad experiences.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I really do try to take the time to learn a lesson in it.
Yeah.
You know, there's a sign that I have no regrets, just lessons learned. And every good boss I've had was a person who owned their stuff. Every bad boss I had was a person who threw everybody else under the bus.
Yep.
I never wanted to be one of those people.
Yeah.
I value, I see them. Years ago, I watched the movie Avatar. And, you know, I try to find lessons in almost everything that I'm engaged in, whether it's a book or a movie or something like that. And in Avatar, I talked about, I see you. And so years ago, I had an opportunity to meet Maya Angelou. And I was at in a hotel walking in, and she was in the lobby. And tall woman. I didn't expect her to be as tall as she was. And I didn't know if I should say anything to her because I could imagine she would get inundated by a lot of people. And then I thought, well, you know, God gave me this opportunity. What's the worst that can happen? Let me just go say hello. And I said to her, Miss Angela, I said, excuse me. I said, I just want you to know how much of a fan of your work I am. And she stopped. She looked down at me very regally. She put her hand out and wanted to shake my hand. I put my hand in hers and she covered my hand. And she said, and my dear, what's your name? And I told her. And then she said, Mrs. Chisholm, thank you so much for stopping me and sharing that with me. Like that.
Wow.
And she, you know, and then she kind of turns and walks away, you know, again, very regally. And I looked at my hand going, I'll never watch this again. Right? Why did you say it again? But what I remember was she talked about, and I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly the way she had it, but people will forget what you did for them, you know. People will forget what you said, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And she is my kind of North Star. Whenever I meet anybody, and especially my staff, I stop. I turn toward them. I look them in the eye because I want them to know I see you. You're not a cog in the wheel for me.
Right.
The organization is who we are because of you. Every person I have an opportunity to interact with, I stop and I shake their hands. I don't blow by them. I try to connect with them because I want them to know I see you. That's what she did for me. She saw me.
I have goosebumps just thinking about it because describing her as regal and then picturing that experience you had with her just really brings chills because that is what she has exuded. And that's what she left you feeling like, wow, she saw me.
Totally. And I still do that, by the way. I decided years ago, if I walk into an environment, because I'm really uncomfortable in environments that I'm not familiar with, I put on a pretend crown,
Mm.
and I channel her.
Okay.
When I walk in, I straighten my back. I put on my pretend crown.
Uh-huh.
In my mind, I'm doing this,
Yeah.
and I'm doing
Yeah.
this. And because I do
Oh.
that, and I've shared this with other people, but because
Uh-huh.
I do that, I'm often people are drawn to me because they don't know who this woman is. Who is that woman who just kind of glided into the room?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. I know from personal experience. It's like, who is that?
Yeah, my God, But and it's in a way, it's an affectation. In a way, it's
Yes.
very much who I am when I'm in an environment that I'm not familiar with. I don't
Mhm.
know who you are. So all I can do in that moment is to contain my environment,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
So I got a wonderful tip from my beautiful 97-year-old grandmother. Years ago, she used to tell me that her power was in her smile,
Oh,
and she would smile at everyone. And that's what I do. So you've got your crown, I have my smile.
yes,
And, and
and
it really works.
it works for you.
Oh,
Absolutely.
it's my thing. And another thing that I learned from a mentor of mine and it's kind of this walking into spaces where you're uncomfortable or you may not know folks, is as soon as you hit that door, it is that posture, standing tall, and almost like in your head, you're hearing your theme music, right?
Yeah,
And everybody is watching you.
that's the
And
truth.
there's something about having that mindset and that posture and the theme music in your head. Yours is the crown, mine is the theme music and the smile. It
Absolutely.
works. It
It
totally
really does.
works.
It's kind of like this is what I've said to other people. I recognize when I walk into the room that there's a Jackie Chisholm persona, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I get home, I'm a different person. Like I don't wear makeup at home. Poor husband actually knows how I look. But when I leave the house, I'm putting on Jackie Chisholm. There was a woman who was a mentor of mine years and years ago, and I knew at one point I wanted to be a CEO. And I said to her, and she was a CEO. I said, "What are the top three things that you've learned that you can share with me?" And she said that people are always watching. People are always watching. People are always watching. And I took that to heart. So when I leave the house, I don't leave the house without makeup.
Or
Now, I'm
your
not,
earrings,
yeah,
right?
or earrings. And matter of fact, if I don't have on earrings, it's a trick. There's
Right.
something wrong. My mother used to say she didn't leave the house without lipstick. Um, I may not be like completely made up, but I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
have on some makeup.
Mm-hmm.
You will never see me in rollers. You will not see me in scarves. You will not see me in all those other things. Because invariably, wherever I go, somebody knows me. I don't know them,
Yeah.
but they know me. And usually it's a staff person. They'll go, "Hi, Dr. Chisholm." And I'll go,
Right.
and as soon as they say that, I go into Dr. Chisholm mode.
Right.
"Hello, how are you?"
Right. Right.
So it's one of those things that I recognize that I have to do, but I do it in on my terms.
Yeah.
There's something else that I've learned over time, and you alluded to it, Charmaine, and it has to do with filling your space. There's
Mm-hmm.
a power stance,
Mm-hmm.
and it drives me nuts when I see women kind of hunched over,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to back straight and feet planted firmly. Even if I'm in heels, I own my space.
Right.
Okay. Um, when people talk, women talk, what drives me nuts is a woman who's making a statement, but her voice goes up at the end of the sentence as if it's a question, like
Okay.
she's asking somebody's permission
Permission.
to
Yeah.
make a statement. Drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Um, women don't have to be men. I think that's a mistake that too often women make. Are there certain characteristics that are necessary? Yes. So there are times when, and I call it a testosterone button, and it's on my hip. And if I'm in a meeting and they're like mostly men,
Mm-hmm.
I push that imaginary button because it's going to get real, real quick. And I let them know that, especially if it's my meeting on my turf, I run this.
Right.
I run this.
Right.
And sometimes that's uncomfortable because as women, we're not taught that that's okay. We're taught to share toys. We're taught to share. We're taught to nurture. We're taught to make people feel better about themselves. We're taught all of that stuff. Right. We're hardly ever taught. And then on occasion, somebody's going to have to feel bad. It's just the nature of the animal. Everybody's not going to like me. It's just the nature of the animal. And that part is sometimes difficult when you're in a position like this, and especially when you're in a position and men are not used to you being in a position. I'll tell another story. By the way, I'm a storyteller.
I love that.
Years ago, after I'd just gotten to the organization, the day that I got there, I was being introduced to staff. There was a guy who shook my hand and crushed it. I mean, squeezed it to the point where he wanted me to know that he had power. I mean, I had been in the building 3 hours, maybe. And he was much taller than I am. And I remember thinking to myself, and like I said, I'd been there 3 hours. And all I thought was, oh, no, he didn't.
Right. He is.
It's nothing here. So he's and I'm feeling bad because I don't have any of my rings on, and I never do anything without my rings. My rings honor my husband and honor my family, so I'm real, frazzled with my rings on. But he squeezed my hand so hard that it hurt because he squeezed my fingers with my rings on them. So, like I said, I'm about 5'7", 5'9" in heels. He was about 6'1", 6'2". And he informed me that he was told that he was going to report to me. Now, mind you, I've been in the building 3 hours.
Right.
So I pulled him down because now he's got my hand, I've got his hand. I pulled him down. I said, that decision hasn't been made yet. So I'm sitting there, and I'd already made the decision that I was going to interview every single person who worked for the organization. And the reason that was important to me was because as an anthropologist, it helps me understand how people view this culture, and it gave me an opportunity to introduce myself by myself.
Right.
So he was one of the first people I interviewed. Man came into my office. I thought he was going to put his feet on my desk. He slumped in his chair. I'm serious. He slumped in the chair. I thought he was about to put his feet on my desk, and it was going to be on and popping if he put his feet on my desk. And so I said to him, in my entire professional career, I have never had anybody step to me the way you did. I said, I had to meet you. Now, at that point, I had already pushed the testosterone button.
Yeah. And why is it on your hip?
Because it's easier to get to when it's under the desk. Nobody knows I'm pushing it. So I said to him, and I explained, the way you approached me was inappropriate. 4 weeks later, we eliminated that man's job. Now, other people were concerned about him. He was a sacred cow in the organization. The minute we eliminated that sacred cow, and he had another person who was like his partner in crime, we eliminated that position the next day. So within 24 hours, we eliminated sacred cows. And what that did for the organization, I literally had somebody come to me the next day and say, I have worked here for X number of years. I never thought to see the day when that person would leave.
Yeah.
Like that.
Oh, yeah.
And so I know, having done this for a while, that there are moments when being female is a wonderful thing. I can touch a man's, women have the luxury touching a man on his shoulder or his arm. Oh, how are you? And men don't do that to each other. Women can.
Right.
Okay. And for a man, it's often for them, they don't quite know what to do with it. It unsettles them. Okay. Okay. And then I have the luxury of pushing my testosterone button and coming out of a completely different bag because it's necessary. And you took me there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I love the testosterone button. Ever so often I have to pull it out, but mine, I think, looks a lot different than yours.
Yeah. You can just go like, psst.
Yeah. Let me get a little bit of this testosterone and tell you what I really think.
Yeah. The other thing is, I get quiet.
Mm.
Rarely in the almost 8 years I've been there, I can count on one hand the number of times I've yelled. Because too often women there's an assumption that we're going to yell and get hysterical and all that other stuff. Quiet. The quickest way to know that you piss me off is when I hardly speak. And I'll do like this. And then I'll go, we have a problem. And then they go, ooh. And that's what I want. I want you to know that you just messed that up. Now, as a CEO, I do not, in meetings, I never try to do anything to make somebody else look bad in a meeting publicly. But privately, we're going to have that conversation. Publicly, I own it.
Yeah.
As a CEO, anything that happens in that organization, good or bad, I'm responsible for it.
Right.
I don't throw my people under the bus. I don't say, oh, so-and-so was supposed to do blah, blah, blah. I'll go, I did that.
Right.
We messed up. We failed. We fell short. Mm-hmm. But privately, you going to hear from me.
All the truths. Don't mess around with Jackie.
Because if I don't do it, I'm not being the leader. And there are times, I'll be honest with you, Charmaine, there are times when I would love not to have to play the role.
Mm-hmm. I get it.
Because it's sometimes the stress of it, the responsibility of it.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to be human in it. People want you to be infallible.
Yeah.
And that's difficult. It's difficult sometimes. I have to give myself grace. I ask other people to give me grace.
I'm sure. I'm sure you have to do that quite a bit because you are juggling all of those pressures. I'm sorry.
And I'm at home.
Yeah.
I have a family.
Yeah. There is that. What about that? Yes. We have lots on our plate, and all the more reason for us to be happy and to be passionate about what we do, because there's so many things that come to mind. Life is short. We get reminded of that all the time when we have losses. And I know I've had a fair share of losses over the past couple years, and it always reminds you that you got to live today and you got to make the most of it. No regrets, right? Only lessons learned. But as I am listening to you talk about your experience as a CEO, something that you shared earlier was that you have this book.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
So here's the funny thing. Too often I've had to get past my thoughts of who I am and what either the reason I'm here, because I do believe in purpose, and what I want to contribute to the world. So God had talked to me about writing a book years ago. People kept asking me about it. Oh, you should write a book. You should write a book. And I go, yeah. About what? Right. Why would anybody care? So I had to get past that ego part of it. Like, why would anybody care? It first turned into a blog. So I've got a blog called drjacklyn.chisholm.com.
Okay.
And the only thing that I've ever written on this blog, I'm not a social media person. I'm just not. You know, I own the fact that I'm not a social media person. I only wrote when God gave me a word. Every time God has given me a word, that's what you see in a blog. So when the idea of the book came up, I choked for about 2 years. But I remember having this experience of choking before, because when I was in grad school, you know, working on my doctorate, I choked for a year. I mean, there's the enormity of the enterprise. What do you write about? You know, how do you put it together? Why would anybody care?
Yeah.
And every time I thought about it, I would do a mental meltdown and I'd stop.
Yeah.
So in 2021, I woke up one morning and understood what the book was supposed to be. It was clear.
What gave you that besides God?
It was inspiration. It was inspiration. Suddenly I knew. My whole life's journey, and again, this is one of those things that you learn over time. My job is to pay attention to lessons that I've learned along the way, because invariably God is going to bring somebody to me that needs that lesson. So the way that God kind of, in my mind, was Hansel and Gretel leaving breadcrumbs. If you remember that story. And so every time I've had an experience, good or bad, I've taken the time to dissect it. What was the good that I got out of that? What did I learn from that? What information? And I don't do it on surface. There are a lot of people who in my opinion, there are a lot of people who deal with information on a surface level, things that are easy to understand. I really don't. I really try to get under the nuance, in the nuance, what they call the gray area. Most things are never white or black. They're usually gray, and there's shades of gray. Pardon the pun about that movie. But they really are shades of gray. And so I really try to understand it from that perspective, because it's the whisperings in those things that people really need to understand. And whenever I'm having a conversation like the one we're having right now, is understanding the deep things. And the Bible talks about the deep things of God, the deep things, because there's somebody out there who's going to listen to this, who's going to need that word at that moment in their life. And so I try to pay attention to those things. I'm not trying to be all things to all people. Nobody can. I'm simply trying to do that which God has prepared me to do. There's shoes that I'm supposed to fill. And I'm simply trying to make certain that I'm filling to the best of my ability and learn along the way.
Right.
So that's where the book came from. And it's called Leadership Lessons, Notes from and for the Journey. And once that title, and literally was inspired, I woke up one morning and goes, that's it.
Wow.
They're notes from my journey. They're lessons I've learned along the way that I have never seen in a book. I've never seen them anywhere.
Wow.
The perspective of leadership, that came in 2019, I think. And I was talking to somebody, just expounding on something, right?
Yeah.
And I was saying, too often we put people in these leadership positions without helping them understand that their perspective must change.
Right.
I go back to what I told you about the conductor, that when I was a frontline manager, my perspective was here. Then when I was promoted, it had to come up here and then here and here and here. So when I became CEO, I have to look at the entire enterprise. I'm no longer responsible for it. As a vice president, I'm responsible for a division.
Right.
Well, the CEO, I've got to understand, I can't go do a deep dive into everything, but I have to understand the entire enterprise. And too often we don't tell people that.
Right.
So they're still trying to do a job at a higher level, looking at it from the perspective of the previous level. You can't.
Right.
Okay. So that was one that was like brought to me, kind of waking as I was talking to somebody and go, hey, oh my God, somebody needs to know that, right? This is it. It's a chapter. And I started sketching it out using Word, and now it's beautiful. I mean, the graphics.
I remember your model. It's an amazing model.
It's good, and that's all I've got. And the perspective of it being an orbit, that the orbit that I'm in as CEO, the CEOs are in the same orbit. When I was a VP, the VPs are in the same orbit. To get from one orbit to another, you have to break the resistance to move to the next level. And too often what happens is there's a pull upward for people who are ambitious, but there's also a pull downward. Physics. Equal opposite reaction. So once I understood that, it's really helping people understand it is not unusual for you to want to do more, right? That the status that comes with it, more money and all that other stuff. But also, don't be surprised when you have these feelings of insecurity, not sure if I can do it, whatever that means, your fear, failure.
Yeah.
But don't be surprised. That comes with it.
It comes with the territory.
Yeah, because that's the pull.
And that's whether you're in an organization or whether you're on this entrepreneurship journey.
Exactly. That's part and parcel of it. So if you understand that, then it won't be a surprise to you when you feel it.
Right.
Then the thing that happened in 2009, I think, was I was at home. I had taken like the month of December off. And I was, again, thinking about kind of my world, where I wanted to be. And what popped into my head was too often people don't realize that we operate off of these unconscious scripts. And my job was to explain to people what those are. So I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail. It's in the book. But I'll say that we have filters that we use from the beginning. Again, we're not even aware that they're filters because we live these experiences. I'm a Black female, Black heterosexual female who grew up poor, right? But have a middle-class mentality because of the work. Those filters, when I walk into a room, those are the filters that I'm using.
Right.
Right.
And they will either benefit you, right? Or they will hinder you. It's kind of what comes to mind is stinking thinking.
Yeah.
Right? Those scripts cause us to really do harm to our mental state.
But you at least need to know they're there. Like when you do research, there's something that you have to acknowledge in the research, and that is your bias. You have to acknowledge that at the beginning. When I wrote that dissertation, the first few, parts of the chapter, these are my biases. We don't usually walk into an environment saying these are my biases.
Right.
Because they're part of who we are. We just walk in with them. So that was one thing. Then the other part for me was, well, I don't think people realize that when you move from one level to another, there are certain things that happen as a result of that. And I'm not talking perspective now. I'm talking about there's a status that comes with it. There are responsibilities and accountability and power and all that. That's part of the job itself. So as a CEO, I have more power and authority than I had as a vice president. And, to that more than I had when I was a director. Right. So those are just things that are they have nothing to do with you, that have everything to do with the role.
Right.
And you have to learn those at the same time you're learning how to do the job.
Right.
And then the last part is there's a person that I must become in order to do this role and do it well. And for a long time, I've heard people, say, well, you fake it till you make it. And then a lot of people say, oh, that's a terrible thing to do. But the reality is that's what you do. I had never been a CEO before.
Yeah.
So when I got in there, I'm thinking, what CEOs do I know? How did they act? So I started acting like them until I figured out how I was going to be.
How you wanted to do it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
the CEO that I wanted to be. But it talks about in order for you to move from one role to another, you have to be willing to give up the first role.
Yeah.
You can't hold on to this role and grab that next one. You can't do it. No, people, you can't straddle. Either you're going to do it, or not. Same thing is true with an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
At some point, I'm not saying you should quit your job immediately. You should not. Until you have a role, you should have a role, right? And the role should be fairly solid, right? But at some point in time, in order to be a true entrepreneur, you're going to have to let one go in order to get this other thing that you say you want. All right. So it's a decision point. And then once you make a decision, then you go into this unknown of who am I now? Who was I before? And that's your touchstone. That's your foundation. Who was I before? Who am I now is a decision that you made to become into this new role. And then there's a moment, and I don't always know when. And for me, it is always the catalyst has been some negative thing, some crisis. There's a moment that I become. And I talked about this before about the being. And I use as an example, when we were in Atlanta, I had met with the Chamber of Commerce. And the guy we were talking about what this music museum could be. And he said, yeah, I meet with a lot of people and they don't understand. And he starts ticking off the questions that people can't answer. And as he's doing this, I'm going, I know that, and I know that, and I know that. So then when he finishes, I'll say, well, let me tell you how we did it at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And so I answer all of his questions. And as I'm answering this question, my mind goes, oh my God, you really do know that. And it was in that moment that I became the CEO of something that didn't exist, that only existed in my head.
Right.
But in that moment, I stopped pretending to be the CEO. I was the CEO. I became the CEO. And now that I understand the process, when I got this job, I could see how I've gone, went from this to fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And then the moment that I became the CEO.
Yeah.
So I don't have to do anything other than what I'm doing because I understand. I understand the process.
So that reminds me of when you were talking about physics. Movement turns into momentum. Oftentimes we run away from the process because it's too hard, it's too scary. We don't know exactly how to navigate it. So we just stand still, we do nothing. What I am hearing you say is that even though you may have walked into that environment unsure of the role of being, right? To stepping into that CEO role, you continue to move forward. You still had, you had movement.
Right.
And at some point, because of the experiences that you have had with people and explaining and brainstorming and idea creation, you realize that experience you had back at the Rock Hall of Fame is a perfect example of, I know what I'm doing. I understand this. And that's where the becoming kind of falls into place. I think about as many years as I've worked in corporate America. And when I started my consulting practice 7 years ago, I remember in the beginning just feeling like I know what I'm doing, but I don't necessarily know how to be a business owner and how to business develop, because I only had to sell my ideas internally and in my head. I didn't, that took a different kind of approach. So I thought to business developing on my own. As I started working with my clients, all of the experiences that I've had working in corporate America, somehow or another just came back. And they were relevant to whatever it was I was working with my clients on. And that's when you start to feel like, well, wait, now I'm becoming, right? I'm becoming that consultant because wait a minute, I knew this stuff all along, but my stinking thinking or my perception of not having the right kind of experience for this moment, it really does start to come out, but you got to have movement.
Right.
And that movement turns into momentum.
Right.
And it's like a cyclical, right? It's going to, you're going to constantly have those kinds of experiences. But that really spoke to me when you shared that, because I'm like, that's exactly what I experienced.
It's really funny because we know more than we think we know.
Yeah.
I got that on my refrigerator. We really do know more than we think we know.
It's true.
And too often, I'm my biggest critic.
So am I. I think that's most of us, right?
And I think that the upside, and I've said to other people, I'm very empathetic. And I love that about me. But the empathy is also the thing that hurts me.
Right.
Because I feel.
Yeah. The gift is the curse.
Exactly. The gift is the curse. Yeah. And that's the challenge of doing kind of what we do.
Yeah.
The reason that you're doing this podcast is because you really want to share. You want to help people understand. And the reason I'm doing the podcast is because, number one, I love you.
Yeah.
And my purpose is the same, to help people understand as much as we can to prevent somebody from stepping into a hole. Now, you're going to step into a hole. Let's be clear.
Yeah.
You're not going to avoid every single hole. But if we can at least tell you the hole is there,
and that's normal.
And it's normal. The hole is there, and it's normal. And it's those moments, those challenging moments, that determine whether or not this is something that you really, really want to do. I have been blessed with some very challenging moments. At the time, I didn't consider them blessings. and they still hurt. So I don't want to diminish the pain. But because of the lessons learned and because of what God has been able to do with those lessons, I live a life that I've never expected to live. I grew up, for those who are in Cleveland, I grew up on Kinsman. I was one of 3 girls. Like I told you, my parents got a divorce because of domestic violence, probably when I was about 7 or 8 years old. My mother decided to marry an alcoholic after that because she wanted to put her children in a house my father wouldn't pay for. And just through those experiences, and then having my own experience and all that other stuff, I, on a daily basis, get a chance to represent an organization that helps people. Helps people like my family.
Yeah.
My mother, I grew up on government cheese, and, there are times we didn't have meat, so we had mayonnaise sandwiches. And I'm privileged to lead an organization that helps people put food on the table.
Yeah.
And I never take that for granted, ever, 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 never. I love that part of the mission of the organization.
Yeah.
The one thing that I will say is, and you alluded to it earlier, I will be 64 this year. I have fewer years ahead of me than behind me. How do I want to spend the rest of my life? Years ago, I used to say, I want to get up every morning loving what I do and saying, God, I can't believe that you blessed me to do this and get paid this much.
Right.
And I never put an upper limit on the this much. Still waiting for that. But what matters to me now, unlike what mattered to me before was the climb. It was because I'm ambitious, because I think some of, going back to where I've come from, I knew I didn't want to get stuck there. I knew from day one, I was not getting stuck there.
Yeah.
And I knew hard work was the ticket in education, right? So that's been my mantra from as far back as I can remember. Hard work and education. So on the climb, it was got to do this, got to do that, got to. And now that I'm at the CEO level, it's not so much gotta, it's I want to do.
I
or
get
it's
to.
necessary to do on behalf of the organization. But I'm clear
Yeah.
about that. It's no longer the anxiety. Before it was
Hmm.
anxiousness.
Hmm.
Got to be here, got to serve on that board, got to, and now with the luxury of age, and we'll say wisdom,
Hmm.
is I get to decide for myself, what do I want to spend my time doing? What's
Yeah.
worthy my time and talent? And
Right.
sometimes what's worthy my time and talent is sitting on my behind and reading a book
Because
with
rest is
nobody.
just as important, right?
Yeah. And nobody
Rest
else
is
is
not a
pressure.
privilege, it's
That's
a
because that's what I'm
necessity.
working.
Hmm.
Yeah, I had a conversation with somebody recently, a couple of women recently, and they were talking about like really deep books that they're reading. And they said, "So what book are you reading? Kind of what books are you reading?" And I had a moment where I had to think about, what am I going to say? I know what I would have said to make me look better. But
Hmm.
what I said was, I'm reading Regency romances because I get lost in those stories. And you could just
Mm.
see them both go, "Oh," and go, "Yeah, that's exactly what I do."
Right, right.
That's
Well, it's
exactly what I do.
interesting. It's interesting. Through therapy, I found out the reason why I haven't been reading books, and I haven't read a book in a few years,
Hmm.
because reading slows you down, and I didn't have the time to be slowed down. I didn't have
Oh,
time to sit there and digest and read the words on the page. I didn't have time, or at least that's what I told myself.
mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And now that things are slowed down, I'm still not reading, but I'm listening. I'm
Yeah, it's
listening to
like
audio. But
giving
it
yourself.
was about slowing down. I just didn't have the proverbial time to do
Mhm.
that.
And when
Yeah.
you think about it, Charmaine, it's like, for all of us, if we consider time money, how are we spending our time?
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
I waste a lot of mine. I'll be honest with you. For me, wasting time
But
is I read voraciously.
mm,
That's how I take my head off,
okay.
and I go into, when I'm in a book, when I'm reading a book, I'm not
Yeah.
just reading words. I'm in the story. I
Mm-hmm.
really don't spend a whole bunch of time listening to CNN and all that. Now, am I aware of what's going on in the
What?
world? Yes.
Yeah.
I plug in for a minute and plug out, because
Mm-hmm.
what I find is I get anxious.
Yeah.
Go back to that empathy. I
You feel it
feel
all.
right. And as a result, I don't sleep well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I have to guard what I put in my mind. I have to guard
Yeah.
what's around me. I guard the people that I have
It's
around me.
important.
If I don't feel like you mean me well, that expression about you keep your friends close, your enemies closer. I try not to keep my enemies close.
No, that doesn't
You
work
know,
for me.
I don't want anybody. If you're not in my corner, if you're not
Mm-mm.
if you don't mean me well, I don't need you to be around me.
I, fa-
Because I want to be a hypocrite.
I found that approach worked better for me when I was working in corporate America, and
Mm-hmm.
not in the sense of, your enemy is closest to you, but I always found myself trying to get in front of, or, in what's the word I'm looking for? Anticipate
Mm-hmm.
what that challenge was going to be. And
Yeah.
that was a lot of work. That was a lot of emotional work, exhausting work. I
Yeah.
don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah. You get to pick your clients,
Yeah.
which is nice for an entrepreneur. So once you get to the point where you've grown your business, you have the luxury of deciding, yeah, I'm doing that, no, I'm not doing that,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
that's freedom. That's
That
absolute
is
freedom.
ultimate freedom.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. I mean, I'm looking forward to the next part. I don't know what the next part is going to be. At some
Yeah.
point, because I know I'm a transitional leader. I walked in the door and said to everybody who reports to me, I'm not going to be here forever. And I'm not talking about,
Mhm.
dying tomorrow or anything like that. But transitional leaders, once we build a foundation, it's not our job to put something on it. It's somebody
Right.
else's job to take it to the next level. And as
Exactly.
long as I understand that part of it, then I'm not going to be surprised when this is over. It's an assignment. the minute I make it more than an assignment, and I've done that in the past, and God
Oh,
had to
yeah.
like break my fingers to
Mm-hmm.
get my fingers off of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've learned to travel light.
Yeah.
I literally, and I've said this to people, I can pack my office up in less than 2 hours. There's nothing in there.
Yeah.
You know, it's taking stuff off the wall, and I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm out. Because
Well, it's just like you told me when I left my last employer, that God put me there to do a job, and now it's time to move on. And that part of the nervousness of it was, who am I?
That's
Who am
right.
I without it?
Without
Who's
it.
my identity without it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I recently I was reminded of Reason, Seasons, Lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Too often we define something that is a season as a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And God had to help me understand that. When I give you an assignment, it is just an assignment.
Yeah.
I will let you know when the assignment is over. Be prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Be prepared to move. Don't, I call it creating a queendom or a fiefdom. Don't.
Yeah.
It's an assignment. The PhD was an assignment. It wasn't my idea to get one. It was literally, God told me to get a master's. On the way to getting a master's, and I always wanted to be a doctor. I should tell you that. I wanted to be a doctor, right? I wanted to be Dr. Chisholm. I thought I was going to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. I thought I was going to go to med school. Hated it. Never. Just the thought of it. I can't look at somebody take blood out of my arm, let alone do it to somebody else. So once I understood that, I'm like, oh my God. And, I've always, the thing that drove me to get good grades was I wanted to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. So God told me to get a master's. On the way to getting a master's, I had to take a comprehensive exam. Well, if you high pass the exam, you could either pass it, high pass it, or fail it. If you high pass it, it was automatic admission to a PhD program. And I did like this. I said, is that the kind of doctor you want me to be?
Is that
what this was? Right. And so it was in that part of understanding, that God said, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be Dr. Chisholm. And I literally put together, I like having things around me. I'm a visual person. Mm-hmm. So I bought license plate that said JJC PhD before I had the PhD.
Wow.
So every day I went to my car, I saw JJC PhD. Well, I wasn't willing to keep paying for those license plates. I only needed the one. So I took the license plate. It was in my office. I put it on like a frame, put flowers around it. And I heard in my spirit, what does that look like to you? And it looked like an altar. And I was like, oh my God, it looks like an altar. I took the license plate. I bent it. I threw it away. And God said, he said, the PhD is a ministry tool. Don't make it more than that. He said, where I'm sending you, you're going to need that. And so since I understood that part of it, I don't get caught up in the Dr. Chisholm. Is it nice to be Dr. Chisholm? Absolutely. There's certain passion that comes with that. But I understood early in the process that in order for me to do the work that God has called me to do, I need to have one of those things.
It's a tool.
The job that I have, I needed the job. Matter of fact, part of the reason I got the job was because I was doctor. I needed it for that. And the job is just an assignment. It's a season. Don't make it more than that.
Amen on that one. Because it holds people back. It holds you from moving forward. And that is one of the lessons that I learned from you. And I still, to this day, I know how many times I've told you this. Do you remember that day at CSU when it was so profound and impactful to me. And so, yeah, it's one of those things that have just always stuck with me. So we are wrapping up, but what I would love for you to share is, when can we expect that book to come out?
The book is being edited now. So my understanding is 6 to 8 weeks of editing, then book design. So my hope is by May to actually have the book out, and it'll be on Google, and there'll be a website and everything. So I'll let you know when it happens.
Please, because you'll have to come back you'll have to come back and share and instead of,
I see her.
Michelle, I'm going to have Dr. Jacklyn Chisholm.
Thank you. I'm scared, excited.
As you should be. As you
know.
should be. I know this is a long time coming for you and something you've been wanting to do for a long time. So
yeah, and I had been fighting it for a long time just because of getting past the who am I to write a book? Who am I to own a business? Who am I to, getting past all of those other things. So that's why, Charmaine, I really want to thank you for allowing me to share my story, but more importantly, on behalf of everybody who's going to see all of your podcasts, that you cared enough to help them understand what this is all about. Because that's how things change, is when people are willing to share and you're willing to share your heart. So thank you.
Absolutely. No, I received that. Thank you. See, I'm getting better.
I know both of us. It's terrible.
Oh, it's horrible. But no,
we're good at giving them. We're terrible at accepting it.
Exactly. But I'm working on it. So thank you so much for your kind words. And I just appreciate you so much for joining me on the Simply Living Me podcast. And I cannot wait for you to come back and actually have that book in your hand, because everybody needs to experience and learn from you and your experiences, your wisdom, your insights. And it's going to be an amazing next journey for you. I am so sure of it.
Thank you, sweetheart. I appreciate it.